Hello, everyone. Once again, here, The Truth has some issues to discuss. The last program was the Israel of God Part 3, and there's going to be an Israel of God Part 4, but due to an issue that's been brought to our attention, we're going to wait on the fourth part of the Israel of God. DS, as you are now aware, there's been some inquiring about the unemployment problem in our society and how that problem is viewed by those who promote self-efficacy.
In the program titled The Psychology of Demons, we demonstrated that civilization is a multifaceted cattle ranch made up of many domains: government, politics, religions, educational institutions, medical institutions, music cultures, ethnic and racial cultures, and on and on and on. We talked about external manipulation by means of brainwashing through what is experienced outwardly through conscious perception, and we talked about internal manipulation by means of demonic telepathy and railroading. Mike, you and I both know that self-efficacy is based on the predilection that demonic principalities have no real control of humanity. And you know that self-efficacy, as is believed among humanists and psychologists, is a grandiose delusion leading to a false notion of self-sufficiency instead of reliance on Christ. So having said this, Mike, go on ahead and explain the situation at hand, and then we will discuss it.
Okay, the whole reason I wanted to discuss that issue is because there has been some inquiry on a certain program Dr. Phil had. Questions were asked what we think of the situation that took place on that certain show. Let's talk about the concept of working for a living. The world is convinced that part of being a Christian is for a man to labor to support his family financially. Now, in the Old Testament, the man would till the ground to grow food. In this day and age, not everyone has land like they did in Old Testament times. So to substitute for this, the world says that a man is to get a job and work for someone else. If the man does not do this, he's regarded as not being a Christian or not a man. Here's a big problem. Not every man is blessed with employment. The Lord doesn't provide all men with secular employment. There are plenty of men who constantly attempt to find gainful employment and are not allowed. Society says no to them. However, society will say that those people aren't providing for their families, that the unemployed have control over their own situation. Well, if all men are required by society to go out into the world and, quote, find a job, unquote, and work for someone else to provide for their families, then that same society should provide employment. But this society that renders the unemployed man non-Christian because of his failure to force another person to hire him is the same society that constantly breaks the commandments of God, worships idols, adheres to church traditions instead of scriptures, and commits all types of abominations before the Lord. Here's an example of the dilemma that I am talking about. DS, are you familiar with the Dr. Phil TV show?
Yes, I am more than familiar with him. I am absolutely tired of the whole psychological society with a constant predilection of their own superiority within the realms of a pseudoscience. It is as if they have some kind of genteel ambience within the realms of science and medicine when they have not truly earned such status. Yes, Mike, I am more than familiar with Dr. Phil, like many psychologists who preponderate their accolades of a pretended understanding of the human soul over the understanding of people who actually live within their own bodies. Yes, I am more than familiar with these people who view themselves as demigods and are viewed as the paragons of our civilization.
Man, it sounds to me like you're not too happy with Phil or psychology.
No, I am not.
Well, then you're probably not going to be very happy with what I'm going to say, what I'm going to tell you right now. On February 15th of this year, Dr. Phil had a show on the issue of employment, or rather I should say Dr. Phil and a man had an argument on this matter. There was a man whose name was Dan on the program. Dan's a Christian man. He was married and had a family. Throughout the years, this man has been railroaded by society and couldn't find gainful employment. He's also had several unsuccessful businesses. The bottom line was that this man, Dan, could not provide financially for his family. His wife and mother-in-law were also on the show, and they were very hateful and resentful of him for his lack of providing. There was also some sort of religious pastor on the program who was also very hateful, and his name was Pastor James, I believe it was, from Dream Center. Pastor James was also very hateful. During the program, Dan starts to run down his most recent business ventures that were very unsuccessful. The host, Dr. Phil, actually says to Dan, quote, "In the meantime, why not just get a job? I'm not saying not to pursue this, but why not go get a job to provide for your family?" Unquote. Then Phil turns to this pastor who barks out the following, quote, "Yeah, the fact is God is concerned with what we earn. God wants to make sure we work. There are so many scriptures in the Bible that deal with the need to get a job. We need to work. We need to provide for our family. If we do not provide for our family, then the Bible clearly says you're not of the faith and worse than an unbeliever." Unquote. And of course, this created an upheaval of applause in the audience. Now, DS, I know you have an opinion on this.
For starters, men should be able to provide for their families. That's the way it should be, but in our society, things are not always so black and white. And the way you are describing the situation, the man Dan seemed to be in a situation where his constant business attempts were deracinated before he ever could gain some sort of success.
No, his situation was something that seemed to be beyond his control. And what really got on my nerves is that people like Phil in the audience were pressuring Dan to, quote, "just go out and get a job," as if employment is some type of guarantee in the society without obstacles.
I see what you are saying. If that is the case, then I have some things to say, and I think we should deal with the American employment situation from two angles. Number one, existentially, which stresses freedom of choice and responsibility for the consequences of one's acts. And number two, the reality of demonic principalities, which railroad humanity into cattle, dividing humanity into domains. Let's begin with the first outlook. Okay, the normal definition of existentialism, and I know there are other usages of this term, but the normal definition of existentialism is that there are no metaphysical forces at work in people's lives, only their environments, and that a person's situation is determined by his or her choices. Now, for starters, even if we do not believe that angelic beings regulate humans like cattle, we still have serious problems. And why is that the case? Let me begin here. On the internet, there is a website of some sort titled Lights on the Lake, Why We Have Unemployment Problems in America. Now, in this site, there is an interesting statement. Let's read it. John Smith started the day early, having set his alarm clock made in Japan for 6 a.m. While his coffee pot made in China was perking, he shaved with his electric razor made in Hong Kong. He put on a dress shirt made in Sri Lanka, designer jeans made in Singapore, and tennis shoes made in Korea. After cooking his breakfast in his new electric skillet made in India, he sat down with his calculator made in Mexico to see how much he could spend today. After setting his watch made in Taiwan to the radio made in India, he got in his car made in Germany, filled it with gas from Saudi Arabia, and continued his search for a good-paying American job. At the end of yet another discouraging and fruitless day, checking his computer made in Malaysia, Joe decided to relax for a while. He put on his sandals made in Brazil, poured himself a glass of wine made in France, and turned on his TV made in Indonesia, and then wondered why he can't find a good-paying job in America.
Well, that's very amusing. In other words, most of the job opportunities of America are going to foreign countries, and the opportunities to get a good job are quickly disappearing.
Yes, Mike. While Dr. Phil enjoys his fat salary, has he ever considered that for many Americans, their jobs are now in Indonesia, Brazil, Malaysia, Saudi Arabia, India, Taiwan, Mexico, Korea, Singapore, Sri Lanka, Hong Kong, China, Japan, and any country that corporate greedy thieves can acquire slave labor? Has he considered that? There are many people in America today who are losing jobs because the jobs have progressively made their way overseas. Unemployment has increased because of the loss of job opportunities in America, and it is getting worse by the day. This notion that America is the golden fountain of employment is a non-reality for many. And to predicate unemployment as the fault of one's unwillingness to just go get a job is nonsense. Don't get me wrong, there are people out there who do not try to get work and are just lazy. But there are also many people who are watching their jobs disappear and are being denied employment as well.
That's correct, yes. And I also see another problem. As so many good-paying jobs have been taken over the ocean, people are left with low-paying minimum wage jobs. And Americans are competing with foreigners for those jobs.
Oh, of course Americans are fighting for low-wage jobs. According to a web article by the Source Immigration Reform Law Institute, these problems exist all over America. Notice the following information. We read, "It's hard to get much more all-American than Dick Clark, and it's hard to find a more all-American town than Branson, Missouri. However, a complaint filed by the Immigration Reform Law Institute, IRLI, alleges that American workers at Dick Clark's American Bandstand Grill, AB Grill in Branson, are being discriminated against when it comes to hiring in favor of illegal alien workers. AB Grill, founded by the legendary American Bandstand Emissaries production company, was recently purchased by another American success story, Daniel Snyder, owner of the Washington Redskins. IRLI, as the only public interest law firm in the United States devoted exclusively to protecting the rights and interests of U.S. citizens in immigration-related matters, filed a complaint on November 28, 2007 with the Office of Special Counsel for Immigration-Related Unfair Employment Practices of the U.S. Department of Justice on behalf of a former employee of the AB Grill who was fired because he threatened to expose this self-proclaimed all-American establishment. This employee threatened to notify federal immigration authorities of the blatant violations of federal immigration laws." Now here is a quotation. Quote, "American workers all across the country have suffered job loss, lost wages, and overt discrimination as a result of large-scale illegal immigration and a consistent failure of the federal government to hold employers accountable," unquote, noted Sharma Hamid, IRLI staff attorney. Quote, "What makes this case particularly deplorable is that the discrimination is being practiced by a company and in a town that have prospered by portraying themselves as icons of American culture and values," unquote.
Not only are many jobs going overseas, but Americans have to compete with foreigners for even the low-grade jobs. What does all this amount to? I'll tell you, DS, it all amounts to unemployment.
Yes, Mike, more unemployment. On the web, there is a small article titled "The Underemployment Changing to Increasing Unemployment, the U.S. Depression Becoming More Intense" by Karen Zuba. It reads as follows. "The U.S. economic depression is real. No one wants to accept it. They do not even agree that there is a recession. The reason is not self-denial. The reason is something else. Classical textbook economics is struggling to understand that there can be an economic depression even with full employment. Let us look at the reason of the economic depression. Since 1980, America deprived its middle class by exporting jobs, allowing illegal immigration, and bringing in H-1B well-paid technicians from India and other countries. The rich became richer and poor became poorer. People dipped into their credit cards and their home equity to pay their bills. This is known as underemployment-driven economic depression. It took 28 years for the depression to become reality. The underemployment is now changing to increasing unemployment. The U.S. depression is becoming more intense."
Yes, not only does the relocation of jobs to other countries and foreign competition to work at low-wage jobs create problems, but there is also the problem of discrimination, which comes in all kinds of forms.
That is correct. Discrimination causes unemployment every day. An article by the American Civil Liberties Union says says this: discrimination based on sex, sexual orientation, and gender identity at some level are all discrimination based on stereotypes about what is or is not appropriate for men and women. What jobs are appropriate? What relationships are appropriate? What kind of personal and public identity is appropriate? Trying to split them apart makes little sense and invites the kind of legal hair splitting that has made so many civil rights laws less effective. Now let's stop here for a moment. On the same page, they also say this. We read, the blanket exemption for religious employers is broader than exemptions in other civil rights laws and leaves many workers with no legal protections. Every federal civil rights law has a limited exemption for religious organizations. The 1964 Civil Rights Act says it is not illegal religious discrimination for a religious organization to give preferences to members of its own church. The Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, has a similar exemption and also allows a religious organization to require employees to comply with its religious tenets.
Sex, gender, religion, and a whole host of things are icons for discrimination in the realms of employment. I must say that today, as the Christian right grows, religion is becoming more and more a tool to discriminate.
Oh, I know. I have been denied employment on several occasions simply because I would not work Saturdays. On one occasion, I was denied a job because the guy who was doing the interview was a hardcore Southern Baptist, and he pressed religious issues during the interview. And this was not even a Baptist organization. When I told him politely that I am not interested in dispensational religions, his countenance became unhappy. And of course, I did not get the job. Oh, I can guarantee you that many interviews are being filtered through people's personal biases and subjectivism.
So that particular company only hires people who believe lies. And you did not get the job, did you? Now, according to Dr. Phil, you were not providing for your family and are worse than an unbeliever. You worse than unbeliever, you. How dare you not get that job? Discrimination comes in many forms, DS. And let us not forget about racial quotas either.
Yes. Racial quotas. On the internet, there is a site called When Quotas Replace Merit, Everybody Suffers by Peter Brimelow and Leslie Spencer Forbes. Let me read some of the things they say, because what they say is accurate by many other sources. We read, quotas are not the law of the land exactly. They are explicitly banned in both the 1964 and 1991 Civil Rights Acts. Nevertheless, corporate America has been terrorized by the legal legerdemain, whereby any statistical disparity between workforce and population is equated with intentional discrimination. Throughout American business, newly entrenched affirmative action bureaucrats are enforcing discrimination by race and sex in favor of the, quote, protected classes, unquote, women, minorities, and most recently the disabled, as decreed by Washington. Quote, balanced workforce, unquote, is, of course, yet another euphemism for quotas. Payne is apparently saying that Xerox discriminates against white males in favor of the, quote, protected classes, unquote. He says it without apology, but if anyone cares, white males have feelings and families to support too. Quote, to cut whites out of the entire process is racism, pure and simple, unquote. Layman's a white male reporter for the San Antonio Light, which is due to close down any day. He says Gannett and other major news organizations are showing interest in his Hispanic colleagues exclusively. But he adds, quote, I don't want to be quoted. I'll never find another job if I am, unquote. And we continue reading here, quote, word comes down, but it does not go out, unquote, says Claremont McKenna, college sociologist Frederick Lynch, author of the only study on the impact of quotas on white males, Invisible Victims. He cites a Los Angeles manufacturer whose receptionist was instructed to accept but quietly shelve employment applications from whites and Hispanics after they had left the room because the plant did not have, quote, enough, unquote, blacks.
Well, to me that looks like discrimination, but of course it's not. There is one thing that is certain in my mind. Racial quotas cause unemployment in America. And it causes the quality of work that's done here to diminish.
Mike, that is true, and let me tell you, racial discrimination is diversified in our society. White people discriminate against blacks. There are all kinds of cases that can be read online of white employers discriminating against blacks and other racial groups, and likewise, Hispanics, blacks, and others discriminate against whites, and they discriminate against each other. Now, I know our one-sided hypocritical media likes to portray discrimination one way, what whites are doing to blacks, Hispanics, or some other group, but the reality is this: everyone is discriminated against in this society. Okay? Everyone is discriminated against in this society. Whites are being discriminated against, blacks are being discriminated against, Hispanics are being discriminated against, and on and on and on and on. And let us never fail to realize discrimination goes well beyond these categories as well. Every racial group discriminates against their own for superficial reasons. Let me give you an example. I can't count the amount of times that I have lost jobs or have been denied jobs because I don't dress, speak like, or share the same culture as the Midwestern white people. I know a black man from Africa who rightly told me one day at church, quote, "Here in Missouri, it does not matter if you are white or black. If you are not like these people, you will never get a job or keep a job for long," unquote. My mother, who was working a security job down in Florida, told me that she had several applicants from Missouri because these people could not get or keep jobs in Missouri due to being different than the Midwestern culture of whites, and race had nothing to do with it. This type of nonsense goes on everywhere and in every race. Now, I do realize that those who propagate affirmative action and programs that are similar to that don't want to tell you these things. They want to keep everything as a one-sided issue, but I'm sorry. The issue of discrimination is so much more vast than their myopic-minded understanding of reality. It's so much more vast than their stupidity.
Yes, I happen to agree with you, DS. And stupidity is right. Now, the relocation of jobs, competition for minimum wage jobs between foreigners and Americans, and discrimination in all its forms are definitely creating unemployment and poverty.
Yes, Mike, poverty as well. I am going to read some paragraphs from an online source titled Poverty and Unemployment in America by John Peterson. Now, the beginning of this page starts with a quote. We read, "They're sending $87 billion to the second richest oil nation in the world, but can't afford to feed their own here in the United States." And that comes from Dan Larkin, unemployed. Now let's read some of these paragraphs. The crisis of unemployment and poverty in America continues to worsen. Despite a nominal increase in jobs in recent weeks, what is not reported is what kind of jobs are being created. Manufacturing jobs, the backbone of any economy, continue to be lost for the 37th month in a row in October. For the vast majority of Americans, the days of high-quality jobs with decent wages, security, and full health and retirement benefits are a thing of the past. The effect this is having in terms of unemployment, homelessness, and even hunger right here in the U.S. is a devastating indictment of a system which places profits before human need and suffering. In the year 2002, 1.7 million Americans slipped below the poverty line, bringing the total to 34.6 million. That's an astonishing 1 in 8 of the population. Over 13 million of them are children. In fact, the U.S. has the worst child poverty rate and the worst life expectancy of all the world's industrialized countries, and the plight of its poor is worsening. 31 million Americans were deemed to be, quote, food insecure, unquote. Of those, more than 9 million were categorized by the U.S. Department of Agriculture as experiencing real hunger, defined by the U.S. Department of Agriculture as, quote, uneasy or painful sensation caused by lack of food due to lack of resources to obtain food, unquote. In 25 major cities, the need for emergency food rose an average of 19% last year. The number of Americans on food stamps has risen from 17 million to 22 million since Bush took office. There are more Americans living in poverty now than there were in 1965. What happened to, quote, progress, unquote, and things getting better from generation to generation? What is Bush's solution? Faith-based charities. And the Democrats are no better. Let's not forget that it was Clinton who dismantled the system of social welfare we fought for in the 1930s and 60s. He slashed the welfare rolls from 12 to 5 million in a matter of years. And now that there are no jobs to go around, there is no safety net for millions of the most vulnerable members of American society. But the fact of the matter is, we don't want welfare. We want quality jobs, health care, housing, and education. And we don't mind working hard to get these things. But the capitalist system is based on the endless pursuit of profit. Our interests come second to the interests of the CEOs and billionaires. And this in the richest country in the world? So where is all the wealth workers create going? It's no mystery. It's all in the hands of a tiny minority of ultra-wealthy parasites who leech off our hard work, blood, sweat, and tears. There is absolutely no material reason why we can't have full employment, free universal health care and education, and much, much more. But to get this, we need to fight for it. The capitalist class and their political representatives are not going to give up their wealth, power, and privileges without a fight. Let's go on ahead and stop here.
DS, that guy definitely sounds like a man who is fed up with the unemployment problems in America. He sounds like a man who probably would get tired of Dr. Phil quickly.
John Peterson is just telling it like it is, and if you recall, we began discussing this whole situation with the concept of existentialism in the background, which stresses freedom of choice and responsibility for the consequences of one's acts. And of course, this idea, in its basic definition, denies metaphysical involvement in man's affairs. Let me say this. The issue between Dr. Phil and Dan, whose business has failed, that whole argument, as you put it, Mike, sounds like more existential nonsense with pseudo-beliefs about self-efficacy. Now, I do not deny that you and I have choices and a will to do things. However, we do not live in a world where our choices and will control all circumstances. And we do not live in a world where our choices and will override the minds of others. The mere fact that you choose and will yourself to get some job does not mean you are going to get the job, because as we are seeing today, there are a multiplicity of problems that bar such notions of self-efficacy. Jobs relocating overseas, competition with foreigners for minimum wage jobs, discrimination of a major variety, on a major scale, discrimination of many forms, and ultimately the subjective and biased mindsets of individuals who observe your worth when applying for employment. Now, Dr. Phil, along with all self-efficacy talkers, can sit all day long talking about how easy employment is to acquire, or that if a person is unemployed, it is solely that person's fault. They can do this if they want, but it reveals their stupidity, and that they are not ascertaining the larger picture in its multifarious form of the obstacles, and in many cases being completely cut off. They are not perceiving the larger picture of the real problems in our society. Let me tell you what I absolutely hate about the self-efficacious existential mindset. It inadvertently says that you can choose and will yourself to do anything, which makes you the center of the world, as though everyone's minds will just submit to your choices and will. What flamboyant narcissism. We need to ask these questions here. If someone like Dan looks hard enough, will he find a good job? The probability is low in today's America. If Dan looks hard enough, will he find a minimum wage job at fast food restaurants? Maybe, but how can anyone know for sure? There is much competition for minimum wage jobs in today's America, and Dan, no matter what, will have to face the mindset of the one doing the hiring. The one who hires will decide Dan's worth, and he or she will decide on their subjective understanding of what someone's worth is.
Dan's situation seems to be something beyond his control. And you know what really got on my nerves? It's that people like Phil and his retarded little audience were pressuring Dan to, quote, just go out and get a job, unquote. As if employment is some type of guarantee in this society without any obstacles. It's as if a job seeker can just force a person to hire him. How would they do that? Perhaps at gunpoint or by intimidation or fear?
I know exactly what you are talking about. If that is the case, then I have some things to say. First of all, how in the world can a person force someone to hire them? As you explained to me in our conversation and analysis of that particular show, Dr. Phil and some pastor were ripping into this Dan guy because he hasn't just, quote, got a job, unquote, even though Dan told Phil that he has been seeking employment and can't find any. So having that in mind, Dr. Phil insists that Dan has failed his family by not magically just going out into thin air, I guess, and getting a job. And how would Dan do this when he has been refused over and over again? Is he supposed to use force, perhaps even deadly force? Mike, I see how stupid his argument is. I know this. Based on our analysis of that situation, it seems that it is through no fault of Dan's that he is not allowed to have a job or any sort of successful business. So would Dr. Phil have Dan obtain employment through the barrel of a shotgun? Let me tell you what I think. Instead of putting this guy Dan down, this Dr. Phil, probably not even a real doctor, could offer employment to Dan, but I can guarantee you he will not do that. These are the type of people James talks about in James 2:15-16. We read, if a brother or sister is naked and destitute of daily food, and one of you says to them, depart in peace, be warmed and filled, but you do not give them the things which are needful to the body, what does it profit? I remember several years ago, I was having problems finding employment, and different church people who had businesses told me to just go get a job. That's what they said. And I said to them, sounds good. Why don't you hire me on your construction crew or factory? You know what they said? They said, oh, well, we don't have any openings right now. You know what I said to them? I said, you sound like everyone else. So, Mike, in dealing with this Dr. Phil show, he is like many. He has no problems, and he projects his situation on everyone else as if anyone can just be where he is. And since Dr. Phil can use that kind of projection, then he should give Dan employment, because surely he can afford to give Dan employment.
That is very well put. And exactly, Dr. Phil can't afford it. So perhaps it may mean that he stay in executive suites instead of presidential suites when he travels, or that he take less vacations. I'm not insisting that Dr. Phil give up his private jet or his big house in the hills with a bowling alley and private golf course, but just give the guy a job. He could do that without crimping his lifestyle too bad.
I agree. Instead of putting the guy down, why not give him a job on his staff? I think that would serve more of a purpose than to go off on the guy half-cocked and talk out of the side of his mouth like he did.
Well, DS, I think it's apparent that employment opportunities in the concrete reality we live in are not as easy to obtain as some maintain.
Right. Is it impossible to find employment? No. Is it difficult? Yes. But wait a minute. There are many who, after looking relentlessly for work, go to the streets holding up signs that say, work for food. In reality, things are not really black and white, because there is a serious underlying problem behind the reality we see.
Yes. You are referring to principalities and powers, the demonic cattle ranching of the human race with all of the railroading.
That's right. You see, if we look at the employment situation with the predilection of existentialism, self-efficacy, and no metaphysical realities, even with this view, the idea that one can simply do what he wants, that's a non-reality based on the previous observations. But the real truth is that demons have structured the world into a multifaceted cattle ranch made up of many domains. As we analyzed in the program titled Psychology of Demons, the masses are deliberately railroaded into social divisions where inequality and intolerance flourish. For example, take African Americans prior to the Civil Rights Movement. Though some blacks were able to get jobs and live their lives, there were a great many that were railroaded by circumstances, and they could not get anything. They could not go throughout white America and get the job of their choice. No, no, no. The devil created impossible racial obstacle courses to railroad blacks into poverty and hopelessness. I am sure that, like today, Many conservative whites sat around saying, "Why don't they just go get a job?"
Yeah, just go out and get a job. Yeah. DS, the problem is that the majority of people are cattle. And they do not see how concrete reality works. And they surely are incapable of understanding that the so-called reality is a multifaceted creation of Satan. They just don't understand that. Demons are in every domain of society, weeding out people, and demons use inept humans to do his work.
Right. The inept humans, which is the majority that Satan uses, are inept in that they have no clue that there is a parallel reality where demons operate and manipulate humanity, from the individual all the way to the larger masses. Mike, if people like Dr. Phil and his audience got on your nerves on that particular show, then let me tell you what is worse. Christians that believe in the self-efficacy doctrine. Christians that believe that one can simply do what they want in this world.
Yes, I'd like to become president, therefore I am.
They ought to know that the devil is the architect of the world and holds the deck of cards. When Christians see others suffering, they should know that the devil is the devourer of lives as well as civilizations. But do we see such sympathy among the masses of Christians? No, we do not. They speak the same stupid rhetoric as the heathen. And what is that? Oh, you can do this and that if you just set your mind to it.
Yes, DS, if we set our minds to it, could we actually be the prez? That's just stupid to think so. DS, okay, here's an idea. You can be the prez and I'll be the vice prez. Let's just call the White House right now and tell George to get out and tell him to make sure that the jet's fueled up for our arrival. I'd like to take a vacation. Yeah, those kinds of Christians are also cattle, and they also have no clue that they have been shaped by the devil to think in accordance with whatever domain they have been placed in.
Exactly. So when they speak that stupid existential rhetoric, oh, you can do this or that if you want, if you choose, as though the devil's reality bends to one's will, I ask them to read James 4:13 through 16, which says, "Come now, you who say today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city, spend a year there, buy and sell and make a profit, whereas you do not know what will happen tomorrow. For what is your life? It is even a vapor that appears for a little time and then vanishes away. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills," notice that, if the Lord wills, "we shall live and do this or that. But now you boast in your ignorance. All such boasting is evil." In other words, this self-efficacy doctrine, according to James, is arrogance and evil. Because we can't just do what we want. We have to be in God's will. I think James chapter 4:13 through 16 is too clear to miss. If what you seek to do is in God's will, you will have success. If you are not under God's umbrella of grace and protection, then you will either be led from yonder to hither by the devil in his mazes. Okay? But we must never forget that there is a war between good and evil, and many of God's people may only just have the basics of life, because the wealth of this present world is in the hands of the devil's agents. And also, it's not hard to realize that many will undergo boycott of some form in this civilization, even today, even before the mark of the beast is enforced. I mean, are we to dream that the devil does not have strategies to boycott people? The devil successfully did that with African Americans. The devil does that with all kinds of people in this society.
Well, he sure does. Throughout history, the devil has boycotted races of people, as well as individuals, for different reasons.
Yes, look at all the Protestants in France who lost their livelihoods because they would not bow down to the Pope. The French Huguenots as a people paid a heavy price. Look at individuals such as William Tyndale and John Wycliffe, who did not have normal functional lives in the devil's world. And why? Because they would not bow to popery. I got big news for everybody. History is filled to the brim with the stories of groups of people, races, and individuals who had serious problems, complications, and even death because they would not play ball with the devil's world.
To me, the issue is the same today as it was back in the days of Protestantism. The devil's multifaceted cattle ranch is worked by the papacy and the Jesuits. In other words, the papacy and the Jesuits are the main agents of the devil that make the cattle ranch work. For example, one of the best ways to brainwash people is through the media and TV programming. These avenues are designed specifically to manipulate the masses of human cattle. And I know Romanism is behind this work.
Well said, Mike.
Believe me, I'm not overstating the matter. For example, on television and in the movies, when there's any reference to a godly man or a holy man, why are they always portrayed as Catholics? This is as if there's no other church. And also, it's as if the Catholic Church is the Church of God in Christ. And DS, this makes me sick seeing all this all the time on TV, because the Catholic Church is not the Church of God. Catholic priests are not priests of the Lord. We have proven this several times in earlier shows. In fact, the Roman Catholic Pope is Antichrist. And that's a fact. But in Hollywood, where there's a church, it's always an only Catholic. Catholic, Catholic, Catholic. Never Lutheran, Protestant, Mormon, Adventist, or any other denomination. What's up with that?
Mike, I got big news for you and everyone else. The Jesuits use what appears to be innocuous images of the only holy men being Catholic to subtly brainwash the masses into believing that Catholicism is good. But we must realize that the whole multifaceted ranch is being worked by the papal agents, the Jesuits. I think we should listen to the words of the ex-Jesuit Alberto Rivera. Play the second clip from Alberto Rivera.
Especially I work in dealing with the infiltration of churches and religious institutions as well as government. That cover a tremendous number of institutions.
And the purpose of that infiltration was what for?
Well, the purpose is what the Roman Catholic system has all the time as her own purpose, is to infiltrate, to penetrate all the areas of life where the Roman Catholic can have control and access for the coming world government. What that means is, in preparation for that world government, the Roman Catholic institution, especially since the establishment of the Jesuit order in 1541, throughout all these 500 years, they've been in preparation and through infiltration and penetration of every level of society in order to take over the world politically and religiously.
That's pretty powerful, yes. Very powerful. And he's an ex-Jesuit. Alberto clearly said that the purpose of the Jesuits is to gain power in all parts of life. Let me play a section of that clip again.
Well, the purpose is what the Roman Catholic system has all the time as her own purpose, is to infiltrate, to penetrate all the areas of life where the Roman Catholic can have control and access for the coming world government.
Avro Manhattan, Protestant Knight of Malta, English historian and agitator, back in 1960 in his work The Vatican and World Politics, said this: "No political event or circumstance can be evaluated without the knowledge of the Vatican's part in it, and no significant world situation exists in which the Vatican does not play an important, explicit, or implicit role." If people do not think that the papacy and the Jesuits play a crucial role in Hollywood, that is simply because people are not thinking, because they do not study. I think Luther S. Kaufman back in 1922 best sums up the problem with people in this country. We read, "So we, in our mad pursuit of wealth and pleasure, and of our own special interests, have neglected the great heritage which has come down to us from our fathers, a heritage of a free government and of free institutions, and these we have abandoned because of our neglect to our enemies who are doing their utmost to destroy our Constitution and our laws and free institutions, which we ought to hold so dear. I have big news. Only those who are seriously seeking the truth will realize that every aspect of this multifarious cattle ranch of the devil is worked by Romanism. Those who are immersed in wealth, pleasures, and special interests and take no time into studying this big issue will never see the reality of the situation.
The Vatican wants to control people's minds, and through Hollywood, they cleverly brainwash the minds of millions that Catholicism is good and the only form of real Christianity. In fact, the only form of Christianity at all. It's the only religion, period.
Everything on television is about brainwashing. Do people really believe that the papacy and the Jesuits are not involved in the media as well as Hollywood? There is a website called the Article Beacon. On this site, the independent investigative journalist Greg Szymanski, forgive me if I'm not pronouncing his name correctly, this journalist on April 1st, 2007, had some very interesting things to say about the media. Let's take a look at a portion of what he says. People are just whistling in the wind and following false information when it comes to trying to stop fascism in America without addressing the New World Order connection with the Vatican and its henchmen in the Jesuit order. According to credible researchers not afraid to touch the Vatican connection, there is no hope at saving freedom in this country and around the world unless the Vatican and Jesuit order are exposed. Then why do the mainstream media, most in the alternative media, and every single last politician on Capitol Hill avoid the Vatican connection like the plague? The reason many truth-telling Christians give is that, quote, all roads lead to Rome, unquote, and people in positions of power in the media and government are paid to protect the real perpetrators of evil, the Vatican and especially the Jesuit order. Ask why people like Bill O'Reilly, Rush Limbaugh, and all the CNN and MSNBC commentators never mention the Vatican. Ask why supposed friend of the people and presidential candidate Ron Paul and Representative Cynthia McKinney never mention the Vatican. Ask why big shot radio broadcasters in the alternative media like Alex Jones never mention the Vatican. Furthermore, why don't people in Hollywood like Charlie Sheen and Rosie O'Donnell, who have supposedly come out for 9/11 Truth, never mention Vatican and Jesuit ties to New World Order and Illuminati terror? The reason is very simple, according to a number of truth-telling patriots. The reason is they all are either uninformed, cowards, or working with the Jesuits and Vatican, protecting their evil ways while laughing at Americans all the way to the bank. And that was well said.
Everything is staged in media. And I can guarantee that the present race between the Democrats and Republicans is a staged event by Romanism.
At Rense.com, there is an article titled The Illuminati Won the Elections by Michael Shore. Let me read a small portion of what he says. The elections in the USA are over, and it now becomes increasingly clear that the Illuminati really do control both the Democratic and Republican parties, so that no matter which candidate won, the Illuminati can continue their agenda for total world domination and the establishment of an Illuminati-ruled global fascist police state. In the article entitled The Illuminati Always Win the Election, it explains how the American elections are a rigged, staged Illuminati event to give the American people the belief and appearance that a real democratic election event is happening. The 2006 elections cost an astounding total of about $3 billion to run for all of these Senate and congressional seats. If you don't have a few million dollars behind you, don't even bother being a candidate in an American election. And the people are misled to believe that anyone can become a senator or congressman. Good luck. All the Illuminati had to do was funnel these billions of dollars to the candidates of their choice and ballyhoo the candidate they wanted to win in their corporate-controlled media. Democracy is not supposed to be a two-party system. It is supposed to be a system giving the people many parties with different ideas and agendas to choose from.
You know, we started this whole program with the issue concerning unemployment problems, and after looking at Rome's connection in Hollywood, media, and ultimately politics, I can guarantee that Rome is behind the unemployment problem in America.
Well, one should ask, why would the Jesuits want to create unemployment unemployment in America. The Abate Leon reveals the policy of the Jesuits on this matter. We read, "The higher classes are always very inaccessible to the lower ones. Let us nourish their mutual antipathy. Let us accustom the mob, which is, in fact, an implement of power, to look upon us as its warmest advocates, favoring its desires. Let us feed the fire of its wrath and open to its view a golden age. And let the Pope, Rome, Catholicism, or the Church, let each of these words become for the people the expression of all its rights, the point on which its eye is fixed, the object of its devotion, the moving spring of its thoughts and intention." And that comes from the Jesuit Conspiracy, page 175. Now, what better way to create hate between the higher and lower classes is there, other than create unemployment and homelessness among the lower classes, and in America, the middle class? Now remember, to the Jesuits, the end justifies the means. And what will be the end result of constant unemployment? The Jesuit Malachi Martin inadvertently tells us the answer. We read, "Nevertheless, the brute fact is that many Jesuits wish to see a radical change in the democratic capitalism of the West in favor of a socialism that seems inevitably to come up smelling just like totalitarian communism. And the fact is as well that there is no lack of individual and influential Jesuits who regularly speak up for the new crusade." And that comes from the Jesuits, page 16.
Clearly, Rome and the Jesuits want to create more and more unemployment in America so that the people will want the new Catholic socialism. The present socialism in the Democratic Party seems to be a prelude to the Catholic communism the Jesuits want in America.
That seems to be the case. John Robbins, the political scientist, makes the following observation. We read, "In the United States, the influence of Roman Catholic economic thought has resulted in the creation of a redistribute state, in which the government intervenes in the economy and society in order to protect the, quote, common good, unquote, and establish, quote, social justice, unquote. Of course, it was not Roman Catholic economic thought exclusively that ushered in interventionist government in the 20th century, but by the last third of the 19th century, the Roman Catholic Church had become the largest religious organization in the United States. By lending its moral authority to interventionist policies, the Roman Church state played an indispensable role in the centralization and socialization of American society and economy in the 20th century." And that comes from Ecclesiastical Megalomania, page 81. Do you realize the significance of this? Do you see the game that is being played between the Republican and Democratic parties? John Robbins, author of Ecclesiastical Megalomania, demonstrates in his book that the policies of the Democratic Party were put into being through Rome's influence. But what about the Republican Party and their Christian right base? And what about the facts that it is they who are speedily bringing the elements of the New World Order agenda into being? The Republican Party functions as a tool to quickly facilitate right-wing neoconservative policies, juxtaposed with creating more unemployment, homelessness, and inequality, while the Democratic socialism lurks in the background, waiting to be swallowed up by people who are fed up with these problems.
I would not be surprised if the end result of all this is a Catholic and evangelical socialism with Republican flavor of neoconservative war agendas. DS, it don't matter anymore if one wants to vote Republican or Democrat. Both parties are domains within the devil's multifarious cattle ranch, and the Jesuits are their agents. Now, having said all this, it's not hard to understand why unemployment is increasing in the U.S. Rome and the Jesuits want this to happen, so that everyone will want their new socialism. So, going back to the Dr. Phil show, can you see how ridiculous it is to think that everyone can simply do what they want?
Mike, as we have seen today, there are so many issues behind everything in our society. We are dealing with a complex chain of control from the top of society to the bottom. People have literally been cattle ranched into social and economic divisions. So note this clearly. Existential self-efficacy doctrine is a vain attempt to extricate individuals from the devil's multifaceted society of domains. Existential self-efficacy doctrine is a vain attempt to elude the concretely observable problems of progressive job loss in America. Existential self-efficacy doctrine is a vain attempt to make oneself believe that Rome is not in power. Existential self-efficacy doctrine is a vain attempt to deny Jesuit power in all aspects of society. What is the ultimate stupidity of existential self-efficacy doctrine? The ultimate stupidity of this doctrine is the belief that one can bend this mammoth-sized and demonic system to the whims of one's personal wants. That is narcissism at its highest peak. People who believe in such stupidity should heed the words of Edwin A. Sherman, American Shriner Freemason, and friend of Charles Chiniquy back in 1883 in The Engineer Corpse of Hell, where he said this: "The Jesuits laugh at us, and during their hilarity, the rattlesnake is coiled at our feet, climbing to strike us in the heart." People should heed those words. Now let me finish by saying this. If anyone thinks he or she will accomplish anything, seek God's will and humbly be led by His Spirit, because only through God can we survive in a world so constructed by Satan. So Mike, it has been a good talk with you today, and I will see you next time. God bless.
Okay, DS, thanks for the lesson. I hope people out there who were seeking the truth got it with this program. If you have comments or questions, you can email DS Ferris at dsferris@hearingthetruth.org or myself at mike@hearingthetruth.org. Take care. Always compare Scripture with Scripture to come up with the truth. Come back in a little while for another program on Hearing the Truth.